Hello, everybody, and welcome back to That Milan podcast. Martino Puccio, Matt Santangelo, alongside you guys. We just want to say thank you all so much for the support on the last podcast with Allegri's appointment. We're going to get into everything rumors-wise today and everything that you've been reading and hearing. But first, we just want to say thanks and subscribe and follow That Milan podcast everywhere at That Milan Pod. We have our socials in the description of the video. Please like and subscribe to this channel. Like this video, comment on this video on your thoughts on the Allegri hire and everything that we are going to discuss in this episode. Santangelo, are you ready?
I am ready. Let's do it.
Yeah, so it never stops. News never stops. We know it never stops. And the latest thing that we woke up to this morning was Mike Maignan and a Chelsea link. Now, again, this comes to no surprise, seeing that Mike Maignan has not agreed to a contract extension. He has 1 year left on his deal. He's 30 years of age. And let's face it, Milan are not playing in the Champions League next year. So things are in flux, and we know how Milan operate. If they don't deem a player worthy of a certain contract, especially a salary, they're not going to pay that person. And by all reports, according to Matteo Moretto, the extension's on standby, Santangelo. Maybe things could change. We don't truly know for sure, but we kind of get a sense of how things have been under Redbird, Tade or not, Allegri or not. We had seen reports that Allegri was saying that it was reported that Maignan is integral to his project and he wants to keep him and they want to extend him. But then Moretto comes out with this. Listen, nothing is done, but this makes a lot of sense for Chelsea and in the position that they're in. And with 1 year left on his deal, much like Theo Hernandez, Matt, Milan are going to have to make a decision this summer if they don't renew him. And again, if that contract extension does not happen, this is a likely move, or if it's not Chelsea, it's elsewhere. So what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think removing emotion from it and removing the sporting sense, because I think that, you can kind of play both sides of the coin here. On a sporting side, I think that keeping Mike Maignan around would be in Milan's best interest, in Allegri's best interest, because you need to have reference points within the team. You need to have leaders. You need to have someone that can be that presence, and Mike Maignan is the captain. And I believe that, despite maybe, some concern regarding his injury records, which in my opinion in recent years has been a little bit blown out of proportions. I thought this year he showed he's available, showed he could produce when he's there, aside from the one or two or in the occasional gaffe in goal. I thought that he was pretty good this year. And I, by all accounts, I don't think that we've seen a regression in play that warrants Milan drastically looking in the market for someone that they could upgrade on. Because truthfully, I don't think that, with Milan's situation, they're going to find a better player than Mike Maignan. But on the financial side, I think that Milan have to obviously weigh any other options here, because he's a player that, whether we like him or not, whether we think that he's worth renewing for a couple more years at his age of 30, Milan aren't in Champions League. And if they're not able to strike a new deal with him and they're not able to keep him around for the long term, you really don't want to run the risk of losing another player on a free, because Theo could be one of those players that if he doesn't find a solution within Europe, which seems as though that's what he's seeking, that's even more of an issue. So I think that from Milan's point of view, if you can sell Mike Maignan to Chelsea, who based on Nizar Kinsella, and some of the other prominent reporters when it comes to Chelsea news as well, are saying that, they're fine with the guys they have, unless, of course, they can find a no-brainer significant upgrade, and Mike Maignan would be an upgrade for them. It's just a matter of how much they're going to pay. And ultimately, if that offer is substantial enough for Milan to the point where it's worth moving on from him. Because I think that if they're able to get an offer similar to what maybe we're seeing float around with Theo, I think that you have to do that, because I think that if you can't reach a deal with Milan's circumstances, not getting Champions League and just needing a sort of a reboot, if you will, you got to see what you can get. And I'm just speaking hypothetically here, Martino, but we want to keep these players. We want to keep Tijani. We want to keep Theo. We want to keep Maignan, all these players. If you're telling me Milan heads into this summer and they're able to get 80 million for Tijani, 30 plus for Theo, and around the same figure for Mike Maignan, we're talking about
It's before
140
selling dead
million,
weight. Yeah.
right? Plus on top of the excess players that Milan can shed. You have to have a real good conversations within about that. And I think that's kind of where my head's at with this, unfortunately.
Yeah, listen, to me, this is also what's so infuriating about these guys, because they put themselves in a position where they're getting less money for arguably, for the both of them, without a doubt. Even how bad Theo has been the past 2 seasons, these are both top 10 players in their position, and they let them get their contracts run down to the final year. So sure, is it the same as Maldini losing them for free? No, it's not. But at the same time, if we're talking about getting the maximum value for a player on the market,
Yeah.
no, it's pathetic. If again, when you're having Theo Hernandez or Mike Maignan leave, and listen, a goalkeeper for like 30 something million with 1 year left on his deal at age 30, listen, you could say that's a good deal on a surface level, but we all know Milan's situation and it's all relative, right? So for Milan, like, I think this is just PR damaging for them. You're just losing another really good player. And it signals to some of these other players, like, what about Pulisic? Pulisic hasn't put pen to paper on a contract extension. He's seeing another guy leave. And I'm not saying he's making his decision based off of that, because we would have to see what Igliatare does with what you're talking about. Could be close to a $200 million budget. Not saying that they're going to be spending all that, but if you look at it, with the figures we had just mentioned, you're talking close to 70 for your left back, your goalkeeper, and then 80 million for Reijnders. You're pretty much at 150 million on top of the other dead weight and Kalulu money that comes in, some of your CDK money, Daniel Maldini, Luka Romero, like all this stuff sort of adds up. And then whatever dead weight they shed, this is what's so infuriating about all this, because what Milan have would be a sizable budget, and at the same time, you have zero trust in them spending what is essentially a war chest in Serie A standards. And to have that sort of trust, even with Tade just being here, it's really difficult for a lot of people. And I'm sure you feel that way too, where we've said it, we want to keep all these players, but we know the reality. We know what they're going to do here. These 3 players are likely out. Leao ain't leaving unless an offer comes in that's astronomical from Bayern or something. Bayern are not dropping 120 million on Leao. That's just not happening. They were willing to do it for Harry Kane because they desperately needed a striker. They're not going to do that for Leao, especially when they just spent 60 million on Olise that on the right side. Like, they know that they could get a player similar of quality for nowhere near that price.
I also feel like Bayern, again, I'm not a Bayern expert by all accounts on their transfer policy and how they go about business, but historically speaking, I think there are very few exceptions they make when it comes to the spending, the excess spending. This isn't a team that goes out, understands that they maybe fell short of, their Champions League objective or their domestic objective, and go out and spend 250 million. They're typically a team that goes about getting players that maybe are 30, 40 million, that are younger players in the Bundesliga or abroad. And like Olise, like that was a great move for them. He was fantastic last year. But 60 million, right? Like a player like that, you wait a year, he's 100 million. So I think that
of course,
it would be a rarity for them to go and say, hey, Milan, like 120 million, you have a deal for Leao. Like, I think that they typically don't operate that way. I could be wrong, but I think that he's the one.
They did spend a lot for Harry Kane on 1 year
project. I envision Rafa being the one, because I think you still, again, you need to put a name to this project. You can't go and blow up the entire core, because I think, again, to your point, that signals to Pulisic and maybe some of the others within this team. Although then, frankly, to be honest with you, when you start looking up and down this roster, there's very few players within this team that, if you do shed this core group, right, of the names that we know, that you would deem untouchable, right? So in a sense, I'm almost saying, like, well, if you're going to sell everybody, then sell everybody, because there's not many more untouchable players that of previous years that we looked at,
Once the three are gone, there's two untouchable players. It's Pulisic and Leao. There isn't anyone
But that's
else.
what I'm saying to you.
I know. It's just this is what they get for putting themselves in this situation, but there is some sort of breaking news, I guess you could say, that here we go soon, very close with Tijani Reijnders off to City. Again, this was kind of known that they were trying to get him in before the Club World Cup. This is via Moreto and Mr. Fab. So listen, all the personal terms are done with Reijnders. They're trying to get him in for the FIFA Club World Cup. And let's face it, Milan are willing to do this. We'll see how close those figures are. There are no figures reported within this deal. But again, Reijnders close to Manchester City. It's funny because I don't want to say what I'm saying here is this is a phenomenal price on the player if they get 80 million. It's a lot of money. However, I'm not condoning anything that this project is or does. Because I've said it so many times that selling a player of this caliber for a club like this is always a negative. Times when Juve were stacked and had a really good squad and someone wanted to pay a record fee for Pogba or Zidane, it made a lot of sense. Milan, in their situation, to a degree, it makes sense because they've been so bad. So what's the difference if they lose him? They finished 8th with him playing great. That's their angle that they're using. For me, I think it's really disappointing that you got a player like this caliber that was great scouting, very rare of them to do, and now he's gone. And this is something that they're going to have to digest. And much like the Tonali sale, much like the other moves that were negatives for the club, guess what, Matt? Pressure's on to replace this guy. And Samuel Ricci is a player that is consistently brought up, but that's also a player that you pair alongside Ricci. We'll see what they do with Caviglia or maybe even what's his name, Frendrup from Genoa. Milan are going to have their work cut out for them. So Allegri and Tade and the rest of the management have to nail this. Because if they, again, Matt, sell a top midfielder, the best midfielder within the team, for record money, and they replace him and only get like one good player in, like heads are going to roll even further, as if they haven't already. So I guess final thoughts on Reijnders going to City, because this is pretty much done and we've spoken on it. It's just
yeah, I mean, I think, as speaking purely on the fan side of things, the sale doesn't move me. It's not like one of those, like I have a sort of attachment to the player. Like, I feel like we all had with Sandro Tonali and, Kaká and some of the more prominent, notable transfers and exits in Milan's recent history. So it doesn't hit me like that. If you're just strictly looking, if the guy was named Bob Smith and he was going for 80 million, it's not like something that's going to be like, wow, we're selling this player. This is disappointing. Like, it's very upsetting. I think, again, like if we're speaking purely on the figures, purely on the deal that Milan could be getting here and the amount that they're going to get in return, it's a great deal. Like I can't say it's not. It's more what the sale signals and more what the sale kind of.
Do you think if Milan had Champions League this year, do they make this sale?
No. But I mean, I'm just saying, like, then again,
that's like the thing.
Because they had Champions League with Sandro Tonali, and they did that, right?
But they were also
that was something that was a different time, because that was the summer of Jerry and Redbird coming in and wanted to sort of make their own. You create Milan in their own view,
and they weren't going to inject capital, so right? Like there's so many like different things that they were like making excuses for. To your point, right? Like. It's just because their excuse was what when they sold Tonali? We need money, right? Mm-hmm. And then what happens with Reijnders when they had record profits? Say they made Champions League, then they sell him for 80.
Well, phrasing. It's the phrasing of what Furlani said, because I know some creators and some, like I think Kush and a couple other individuals put out like videos talking about those comments and saying, it's not necessary. It being necessary versus it being worth it are two different things. Like, if Milan were in a position like they didn't have to sell Sandro, they didn't have to, but you look at the money and it's like, okay, Like
and
Milan don't have to sell Rafael Leao, but if someone comes in and offers 130 million, it's
well, yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know what I'm
To
saying?
your what you're referencing is that he was saying, just for some people, just in case, like
Yeah,
Furlani essentially said, we don't have to sell players. You shouldn't be focusing on players outgoing.
it should be on reinforcements. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
But that's what I'm saying to you. Like that's
well,
kind of
yeah, I know, no, I know,
getting
but
back to
it's
my
funny.
thoughts on it is sporting sense. I get like financially it makes sense to make this move. Because you're not in the Champions League. If you're in the Champions League, you want a player like this to utilize in the Champions League and domestically to compete for a title next year, right? And I think even if you have Tijani, you could still do that at least domestically, even if this team needs a lot of work. Again, it's more what this signals to me. And what it signals to me is this is a team that it's clear and evident they're going for a transition. They're going for a massive shakeup of this team under a new sporting director, a new coach, which again, it's more disappointing because if you do all the necessary things a couple years ago when Paolo called for it, and even when Milan were still a steady player in the Champions League, though maybe falling short domestically, if you invested in that sort of window when it was optimal to invest and to build upon the group you had to compete for more, you wouldn't be in this position. But again, that's all hearsay. It's what's done is done, and Tijani's going to Manchester City for a big amount of money. I just think that if this wasn't this management, I know Tade is in the fold now. If it wasn't this management, I think fans would feel a little bit more like, all right, we hate to lose a player of this caliber and of this importance to the team.
Of course.
But our management has proven they can scour the market and get the right players in to build upon this team and to utilize those funds in such a way where it's not going to set Milan back. That's where I think the pause and real big concern for Milan and fans specifically is, okay, they showed you what they can do when they sell a prominent, high profile, loved player, cornerstone player. And they told you and they showed you what the result of their spending would look like. And it didn't work out. That's where we ultimately have to just wait and see, I guess. But I just truthfully, with clear head, I can't give the trust and faith in this group that they're going to do the right thing, or if they're going to spend that amount of money. Because Martino, who's to say they're not going to turn the money from Maignan and Theo and Tijani and tap into a fraction of that and go cheap?
I don't think so, because they did spend a lot when they sold Tonali. For me, I think, to what your point was, it's about trust, and they see Furlani still as CEO, and I get it. But the thing is, for me, and they have to, talk is cheap. Tade's interview was nice. We have to see it. We have to see what they have as ideas to replace these players, right? Like there was, and I'm not even making an excuse for them 2 summers ago because they're idiots and they had no idea what they're doing, that they lazily and last second promoted people from within to jobs that they never had before and said, here, go on the market and go invest all this money on all these different players without like you guys ever having to think about it, right? Like, because they started in July, because Moncada came in as technical director, D'Ottavio, like it was all over the place. There is a little bit, you could argue, more semblance of hierarchy here. But again, Tade doesn't get the benefit of the doubt, right? To your point, they have to nail it. They have to.
Like by association, you're expecting the worst.
Because it's Furlani that you don't trust, and Furlani hired these guys.
Who's to say Allegri and Tade earmark this guy, and we as fans approve and like those moves, and then Ibra, Furlani, you don't know. You don't know what the dynamic is. You'd assume that based on how swiftly you were able to acquire Master Allegri, you can kind of feel like, okay, maybe Tade does have that pull of a director and we do get things done more efficiently this summer because it's vital we do so. But we don't know. We don't know if that dynamic is still going to be the same dynamic of old, where ultimately Tare likes a player and then they go, nope, I can't do that, and it's them having the final say. So
it's really difficult because this guy is selling a player, a top player within the squad, which reflects what they did 2 years ago, as you mentioned. So that's a little bit more of the same. Theo Maignan looking like they're on their way out, more of the same. Contract extension talks are stalled, which looks like more of the same. But they're also 1 year left on the deal. I think Tade has been put in a really difficult spot in regards to some of these contracts and where this team just plays. I'm not saying I'm giving an excuse to Tade for making the sale of Reijnders, but when he's coming into the summer and contract extensions stalled, we don't know what these players are asking. Truthfully, like there's rumors of Theo asking for like 8 million net per year, which is a lot. Maignan could be looking for like, 6.5 million net per year, which is still also a lot. So you're kind of right in this position where Tade is tasked with making a decision of, if I can't get these contract extensions over the line and they're not willing to kind of meet us in the middle here, they want to leave, I have a decision to make. Am I keeping this player for this season and then we lose him for free? Or I have to go in and get money from these players because I know ownership is not injecting capital next season to help me with the budget if I lose these guys for free. I think that's where Tade is in a difficult spot. And again, I'm not excusing the player sales. I think the best path to build a really good team is keeping your best players. But now everyone wanted to, blame Maldini. You know this. Attack Maldini. What are the negatives of Maldini? Let players walk for free. All right. Well, you wanted it, guys. You asked for it. Now deal with it. Because he's going to sell off players. And people are already saying, I'm not sure how much you agree with it, no matter who Milan bring in to replace Maignan and Theo, that they're going to be far worse and no one's going to be close to their level. I'm not sure how much you agree with that. I would argue. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think on that front too, I guess you can kind of pivot over to like Hernandez and Maignan if you want to do it from like a
yeah, I was well, we did Mike, so I'll pivot to Theo now.
Yeah, so I mean, now it's a conversation of, okay, fine, you're selling these players, the replacements, and how much are they going to cost, right? And I think that we've seen some names floated around for prior to this development with Theo Hernandez and Al Hilal, which doesn't look like it's happening based on reports. Looks like he wants to stay in Europe. He wants to find a solution within Atletico Madrid. I thought was floated around.
Yeah.
There's a couple potential spots, right?
Out of all the top European clubs, it was Atletico that had been.
Yeah. So I think that, again, I think that the big concern is Milan stay cheap. They stay within Serie A. And I'm not saying that finding solutions within Serie A isn't a bad thing. I think that there are some viable options and there's some good players within this league, right? I think from a goalkeeping standpoint as well, Vanja Milinkovic-Savic, who's been one of the better goalkeepers the past 2 to 3 years. Surprised he hasn't been getting much interest from Premier Leagues and leaving Serie A, because I thought he's been pretty solid. Carnesecchi from Atalanta. I think the big question, though, is, okay, fine, you're trying to get a goalkeeper from Atalanta who historically sell really well. He is pretty young. He is one of the goalkeepers for the Italian national team, if I'm correct. Maybe not this time around, because I think it's Vicario Meret and Donnarumma, but a player that is a solid goalkeeper, and he's going to be in the Champions League next year. Where do you think you're cutting a deal? You think you're getting a goalkeeper replacement for 15 to 10 million that's at that level? Suzuki from Parma, is he an option? Because he was also linked recently, in more recent weeks and months, to Bayern Munich. So I just wonder, and I question, where are the deals coming from? Where are Milan going to be getting strategic and having that sort of shrewdness within the market? Because there really isn't many avenues, Martino. I think that's kind of where people are looking at. Because if you're going to sell Theo Hernandez, even on a down year, even on a decline in form, that's still a player that it's going to be difficult to replace. So that's going to be the big challenge, and ultimately going to be how people define Tare, because this is his first market,
Mhm.
and this is going to set the tone for this Tare Allegri relationship.
Yeah.
Is there going to be friction? Are there going to be players and individuals where Milan, look what they did last year. Everyone and their mother knew Emerson wasn't a good choice. They did it anyway. Junior Firpo. I don't think anyone is thinking this guy's a starting quality player. Do they go
No.
cheap? Do they go with bargain bin players? We don't know. Until we see
difficult.
what their policy looks like, until we see one or two names or negotiations begin to materialize, because all we're seeing right now, Martino, is exits.
Yeah.
Like as far as like the concrete negotiations involving Milan.
The only one that we've seen that is strong with a name incoming is Richie. That's it.
And Modric, which is a latest one.
Well, we'll get into that. Well,
yeah.
some of the potential replacements that were brought up, and these were reported by Di Marzio. Udoji, formerly of Udinese at Spurs.
It's gonna cost you a ton of money.
It's gonna be a lot.
It's not happening.
It's not happening.
No.
But that would be the replacement that you would have to get, that you would be okay with Theo leaving. And Cambiaso. The Cambiaso one is very interesting. I don't think that's completely a no. I'd be very surprised if
Juventus are going to cut us a deal. No,
we just
I understand that.
Well, they just got a new director. They're managed very poorly. We just cut a deal with them for Kalulu. I'm not saying it's completely out of the realm of possibility, but Juve, much like Milan, are also a disaster. So when players do want to ask out, that's a possibility. And it's not like Manchester City was not in on this guy either. Like that Juve weren't entertaining a sale. We're going to have to see what Comilli's policy is as well. Cambiaso obviously was a player that was launched by Allegri, and where you saw him get his debut. I think these are the only two names that I have seen that are linked with Milan that I'd be okay with Theo Hernandez leaving. That's just the truth of it. The odds of both of these happening, I mean, Udoji's far less likely than Cambiaso. Cambiaso is like on a shocking level where, I mean, yeah, like it's just basically take all the Kalulu money that they just got, send it back to Juve on top of the other money that you got, and you give it for Cambiaso. To me, that's like the real difficult situation that Milan find themselves in, is that to replace a blue chip player, you have to pay blue chip money. And like you mentioned, like Recci could have been somebody that they gone after last year. Who knows if Torino wanted to sell or not? But now we see what his price costs. It's going to be like 35 million, which I think is a pretty penny for a good, not great player. I don't think he's ever going to be great.
After you just spent whatever you did in January on Bondo and Santi Jimenez, like again, like that's sort of my point, right? Like if we're seeing what figures were floated around for Cambiaso in January for City, they were hot on him. Like that wasn't some sort of fictitious rumor from a fly-by-night source in Italy. Like that was Di Marzio Bermano saying like they're interested. They like Cambiaso, and the figures were 60 million, and everyone was like, "What? 60 million?
And he's a player."
So even if you can say, okay, fine, Juventus are in the situation they're in, they just still made it back to the Champions League. They're still waiting on their coaching situation. And they still need to also replenish their own team, which has its deficiencies. Call me a liar. You get a discount from the 60 million. What is it? 30s? So you're still going to have to spend a substantial amount of money to get a player that maybe Allegri likes, that he feels can fit his system. So again, I'm finding difficulty trying to wrap my head around what the approach here is. Is it going to still be that 20 to 25 million signing? Maybe they go with players from Empoli and some of these other teams that are young, and they try to take a flyer on them like they did years ago when they got Benacer from Empoli and some of these teams and said, hey, like, we trust our scouting, we trust our eye for talent, and we're going to let that dictate the transfer market versus going after the players that are already established that are going to cost us too much money. I don't know. I just don't know what type of backing they're going to give Max on the market. Because if you look at this team, we all know the players that are not deemed Milan quality. We all know how many players need to leave this current fold. There's a Martino. You know this. We all know this. There is a ton of work to do within this team. And if you think this Milan team is going to go and say, we're going to sell Theo, we're going to replace him with a 30, 40 million player, I just don't see it. I just don't see where they're going to go and split. They don't that number. They don't sit at that number. So why would they change? They without Champions League football.
It would just be a surprise. But again, if you believe reports, if you listen to reports, if they have autonomy, if they have the money, if they choose to go and spend more and correct what has happened in the past, it's not impossible. The likelihood of that happening is lower. I would just like to say that, we don't know yet with Tade. That's the main thing about all this, is that we just don't know yet. And I'm not inclined to believe that it's going to change. I think people are not going to get disappointed because their expectation is to have a poor summer. So you can't get disappointed if you know what's happening. Kind of final topic. This was an exciting link. In my opinion, I think some people are being far too harsh in terms of saying this is an awful move. Luka Modric potentially to Milan at the age of 39. Matteo Moretto was discussing this. This is something that's ultimately going to come down to Modric and his family. Modric obviously grew up a Milanista. It's all very well known. Obviously a huge fan of Boban, who is another Croatian legend, probably the two biggest Croatian footballing legends from that country. There's just no denying that with that national team, what those two have been able to do. Modric is one of the greatest midfielders of all time. He's still a capable player. 39 within Serie A is not 39 in the Premier League. This would be a situation where Milan are playing once a week. He would likely be coming off the bench, a start here or there. I still think he can make an impact. I think bringing in a winner, I think bringing in someone with leadership matters. It's important. Just because I don't have faith in management and ownership doesn't mean you still don't try. I think that Modric is somebody that I've always wanted to see in these colors. It would be great to have him within the squad. Ultimately, it obviously doesn't change Milan's project or the future, but I think it is integral to bring in players like this instead of unknowns and guys who are rather unproven. I think this guy could help substantially in terms of leadership, development, because he's always been a reference point, even at Real Madrid in these transitional years in their midfield. Modric would be absolutely a thumbs up signing from me. And if it were to happen, even if it's a year plus, I would love it. Whether or not it happens, we'll see. But I wouldn't be shocked if it does end up happening, because I think, funnily enough, going in with what Redbird's project is and all this kind of stuff, Luka Modric, Milan kit sales would go through the roof, petition or not. That would be a kit that they would, monetize off of. That's how they view things, right? It's one of the greatest players of all time playing for your club, no matter the age. We know what kind of impact that sort of brings. First go into just, the potential move itself and then footballing wise. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think just to echo your sentiments on Luka Modric, because I think it's spot on. This is still a player that 39, fine, we'll call him 40. He's probably closer to 40 than he is 39. In any case, last year he did prove that he can still be an effective player. Maybe not the same player he was at his peak at Real Madrid.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that, but he did play a ton of minutes last year. Somewhat of upwards of 1,800 in the league. He didn't start every game, but I think about half of his appearances in league play were starts. Something like a pretty reasonably even split. I think he still played his Champions League minutes. He did come in. He still provided an impact. With Milan playing one game a week and then excluding the Coppa Italia fixtures that don't come into play until a little later on, I don't see the downside of it. I think this is a player that he is one of the more anomalies, right? You look at the age and you kind of get some pause, but I think Milan have done well with players at this part of their career. I mean, they brought back Ibrahimovic after multiple surgeries, and over a couple of seasons, he did prove to make the impact.
He had no ACL in the Scudetto year. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was paramount to Milan getting, this thing turned around and to becoming the Scudetto winners. Same thing with Giroud, right? A little bit younger, but if Modric had a sort of track record that was injury ridden, I would say, remove emotion, remove the mystique and allure of bringing a guy like Luka Modric, who has that sort of attachment to these colors, as you pointed out. I would say, you know what, let's not fall in love with that. We need to get players that can make the difference, next season. I'm a big proponent and big believer. If he can help us now, he helps us now. If this is 1 year where Milan has the coach now, they make the right moves, again, hypothetically speaking, make the right moves in the market, and you bring Modric in, and maybe he's a big influence in Milan get into top 4 or compete for a Scudetto, dream scenario. Yeah. It would be like poetic. It would be like a romantic story of Milan, how like this guy who came here at the very end of his career could have retired, could have left, on top as a player that's accomplished everything, Ballon d'Ors, Champions Leagues, you name it. He didn't need to come here, but he came here because he had a bigger purpose and goal to get Milan back to where they wanted to be. I think that ultimately what this deal can do for Milan is, does it give Milan some guarantees in a midfield that needs it? Can players that are training and playing around Luka Modric take that next step? It's not just the midfielders, but players within this team, because you're playing with a serial winner who's been there, done that, knows what it feels like to reach the summit and the peak of world football. I think that the terms are going to be key here, because he is making a ton of money. He's not going to do it, and Milan aren't going to do it for the same wages, which I think are somewhere upwards of 10 million per season. So it has to be fruitful still. But Milan shouldn't be in a position where they're going to spend and make him 5-6 million a year. I think that's a little bit much at this point of his career, in my opinion. But it is a player that, again, I'm not going to be naive to the fact that he could still help this team, and it would be great to have him.
He still had 9 assists, 3 in the Champions League.
He's still a difference maker.
He's still a good player. Still a good player. I mean, he played so many minutes. I think people have to understand.
Short-term deal, 1-year option.
There's no downside to it. The only negatives here, realistically, that people bring up, and I think they're very plausible points, are that, this is just 1 year. Like, what is the real, project here? It's just, again, it just all intertwines with everything we were just discussing before this, which is like, what is the real plan? When is this going to be figured out? When are we going to know exactly what's happening? And again, we know Milan's situation. You won't see moves of incoming players until the outgoing players happen. We all know it. So when Reijnders gets over the table, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. That's pretty much it for all this. Obviously, we'll try and discuss things week to week. Milan podcast on TikTok. I'll have more updates, short updates on that. Those are just quickies. Those go on the social media as well. We try and get more clips from the podcast to post on there as well. Again, we appreciate it. Apple, Spotify is where you can always find us as well for your audio podcasts. We're on other platforms as well for the audio. Again, the videos get uploaded as well to Spotify on top of, obviously this YouTube channel here. Don't forget about our alternate YouTube channel. You can follow Matt's stuff here on the ticker right now at Matt_Santangelo at AC Milan Bros. And then again, you could follow me everywhere at Martino Puccio. Any final comments, Santangelo, before we finish? So there was a comment saying that you look very young in the most recent podcast. I would assume you had shaved.
Yeah.
Prior to that.
Maybe I can.
I wanted to let you address that yourself.
Yeah, no, I look noticeably younger when I do shave and got a little bit of a haircut. So that can definitely lend some credence to that comment. But yeah, on your question regarding anything else, yeah, guys, let's wait and see. I think that, to Martino's point, we're not going to know what the market looks like, the landscape of what we're going to do this summer, until some of these cornerstone prominent deals are decided. I think that, because that's ultimately going to be the driving force for the market, right? That's, I think, Milan are going to fund the market, in my opinion. So, which is, again, something we said a couple weeks ago, right? Like, if you're going to make these sort of moves that are project altering moves and market altering moves, they got to be done quickly. So I anticipate Reijnders getting done very soon, which aligns with what we've been saying. And Maignan's moving quick as well. And guys, let's also make this point as well, right? Mike Maignan, and it doesn't seem as though that he doesn't seem like he's not interested in Chelsea. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And if a player like him is interested, and Milan are presenting this opportunity to go to Chelsea, and he's saying, like, I'll talk, it leads you to believe that Milan are very unlikely to renew him. And I think the same thing with Theo. So by all accounts, guys, we're going to see a vastly different Milan team. Whether it's one that we believe can compete next year, that remains to be seen. But we'll keep you guys informed as soon as things happen.
Yeah. Not much else left to say. Yeah, I mean, that's really it. I appreciate all the support. Seriously, we're growing a lot on TikTok. So
yeah, it's good.
If you really are interested in checking out those videos, I have some where I speak longer than like a minute and a half. Details like a little bit. Some of the stuff that we get into on here, obviously, in further depth. We do that on the podcast, but there's also like, quick thoughts on certain things that pop up. So again, we appreciate you guys so much. We keep growing. May was our best month in a couple months after, tumultuous in March and April. So again, it just shows like how great you guys are as fans and supporters alike. So we just appreciate every single one of you and all the respect that you come with. So thanks, guys.